he came up with the move rook takes d5. Now, we did not see this one coming. So the game started off with Anish playing pawn to e4. So Anish makes his intentions very clear from the start. He wants to play aggressive and try to take the lead in the match. And Andreikin plays the move c5. A bit surprising. We were expecting him to play a bit more solidly with something like e4 and perhaps the Berlin defense. And after knight f3, Andreikin plays e6. And here the main moves are d4 from white. c3 is also a move. But here Andreikin came up, Anish came up with a bit of a surprise.
It was a bit of a surprise to see here, but Anish went against his opponent's preparation and he went for b3. I sidelined here in Sicilian where white wants to fianchetto the bishop on b2 and then try to control the center. So there are several options here from black side, but b6 seems to be the one of the main move here, which was rather fast played by Dmitry Andreikin. And after bishop b2, black also developed the bishop on b7, and we had now a knight c3 move. As the pawn on e4 is hanging and white obviously don't want to give up the central pawn. The main line here goes with knight c6 and it can go to somewhere else, but in the game knight f6 was played, which right away attacks e4 pawn once again. However, now white has very nice move e5. This move attacks the knight and makes black's piece to move once again, and on the other hand e5 just gets more space advantage in the center. And after knight e4, let's take a look what happened in the game.
Yeah, so Anish had lots of options here. He could trade on e4 or maybe go bishop d3, bring out another piece and let black trade. But Anish chose to trade on e4. So Dmitry recaptured and now Anish played queen to e2. White does not blunder the pawn on c2 because if you take, white goes d3 and shuts down black's escape of the bishop, and the bishop on c2 is trapped and white wins the game. So Dmitry did not do that. Instead of that, he played the bishop to b7. Now Anish came up with a very interesting move. He played the move h4, gaining space on the king side. Dmitry played knight c6 and h5 by Anish, gaining even more space. Now here, we had a very interesting idea for black. Black could also consider going a5 to try to open up the queen side. And if white goes a4, there would have been the move knight at b4, hitting the pawn on c2. And if white castles, perhaps a move like b5. All of this gets very, very wild. Dmitry chose another option. He chose to play knight b4 right away, hitting the pawn on c2. Now white cannot go queenside castles because you hang the pawn on a2 and black is much better. So Anish played the move d3 so to defend with his queen. And here Andreikin played pawn to b5, a3 by Anish, kicking the knight back. The knight went back to c6, and Anish played queen to d2. So with the move queen d2, he's making his intentions very, very clear. Sooner or later, he wants to proceed with the move d4.
That's right, and you might think that this moves queen e2, then queen d2 will lose a lot of tempos here for white, but in fact, very soon you're gonna see the position where black is actually struggling to find the move, a correct move. So what white is doing is just going slowly into the position where it's just very pleasant, and white is also waiting black to make some mistakes. For instance, if black goes with bishop e7, which looks so natural move, this allows white to push h6 pawn being pushed forward, and white is not sacrificing a pawn, but is just trading the pawn. And on the other hand, black will have a bad looking king side. Another idea instead of bishop e7 is to push d4 pawn forward, like d5, to try to maintain the center. However, this is also not so good as white is happy to open up the bishop on b2 after capturing, and queen takes d6 will be met by castle here. So white's idea obviously is just to castle on the short long side and then put the pawn on d4 to open up the center and to attack the black's king, which is on e8 and is struggling to castle on the short side as well as on the long side.
Indeed. So Dmitry decided to play a bit of a waiting game. He played the move rook to c8, and here Anish played a very nice move. He played rook to h3. The rook stands very nicely on h3 because it can always come to g3. to create an attack, but also, as we'll see later, the rook defends really nicely along the third rank. You might be wondering, like, wait, what does the rook need to defend, right? We'll come into that later. So Dmitry played queen to c7, long castles by Anish, and Black played knight a5. Now here, knight g5, a very nice move by Anish, rerouting this knight. The knight wants to come to e4, perhaps to d6. And if that's really White's idea. So Dmitry played the bishop to e7, putting pressure on the knight, and Anish played rook to g3. So he's defending the knight, but also if the knight now moves out of the way, he's hitting the pawn on g7. And here, the position is not easy for Dmitry. Just to illustrate real quick what we were talking about earlier, if Black plays h6, we go knight to e4. The knight wants to come to d6, because if Black goes c4, we go knight here, knight to d6 check, and if Black takes, we take. The queen is under attack. This bishop opens up. Also, this knight a5 is hanging in many variations, and Black is in a lot of trouble. And if Black takes on e4, then we recapture with the pawn. Now the rook defends nicely along the third rank, because if Black goes c4, we can just calmly play the move king b1. The rook protects the pawn on b3, and it also defends against the potential fork with c3. So White is in very good shape. So instead of all that, Dmitry played pawn to c4. Now Anish took, Black recaptured, and Anish played b4. He wants to keep the queen side closed. Note that c3 is still covered by the rook. And so here Andreikin came up with an interesting choice. He decided not to move his knight, but instead of that, he played the move h6, attacking White's knight on g5.
Yes, and after attacking the knight on g5, here Giri made a very important decision. He decided to sacrifice this knight for a pawn for a moment to expose the king and get a very important pawn. However, he could play knight h3, a very calm move, just keep all the threats on the board. Now knight on a5 is hanging, bishop on, pawn on g7 is hanging, and there are a lot of threats over here on the board. So after knight c6, when Black withdraws knight back and attacks the pawn on e5, White can also just go f4, maintain the center, keep all the threats on the board, and Black was struggling also on the clock at this point. So Anish could just keep the game going in the direction as he started and having a slightly better position. However, things got really, really exciting after knight takes f7, where Black has to take this with the king. And after that, we had here b takes a5, just decided to capture the knight and trade the knights, and had the king on f7, which he gave a check after bishop d5. Next move was queen f4 check, and here Andreikin was pretty much forced to play king to g8. There was one funny line if Black would go king f6. Benjamin, would you like to show to us?
Yeah, if Black goes bishop to f6, we cannot take the bishop because that leaves our queen hanging, but White has a very nice rook takes g7 check. Black has to take. Now we go queen takes f6. If you go to h7, White has queen g6, also queen f7, would have been checkmate. And if the king goes back to g8, White goes rook to d4. Black cannot stop the rook from coming to g4, and Black is simply getting checkmated. So Dmitry went to g8, and here we expected Anish to play the move queen g4, hitting the pawn on g7, which will be checkmate. So Black only has one good way to defend it, which is to play rook to h7 with a very complicated game. But it feels like White should be better, because rook on h7 also sits quite passively. But Anish came up with another very interesting move. He came up with a move rook takes d5. Now, we did not see this one coming. What happens if Black takes this rook? Well, if you take the rook on d5, now White unleashes rook takes g7. Black is forced to take, and now we go pawn to e6, giving a check with the bishop, and if Black blocks, we have queen f7, checkmate. Quite an amazing variation. However, Black is not forced to take that rook on d5. Instead of that, Dmitry played the move bishop g5. So he's hitting the queen cannot move because that put the king in check. So here Anish was forced to capture on g5. Dmitry recaptured. And here's probably where Anish made quite a serious mistake.
That's right. He played queen to d4 in this position. And instead of queen d4, he could go for another crazy sacrifice for a moment here. Queen c4. This looks so unrealistic indeed. But the idea here is that after queen takes queen, white can take either with a bishop, and you obviously want to take bishop rather than the rook rather than the bishop, as those two pieces are hanging. Rook can be captured, bishop can be captured. Let's take a look what happens if e takes d5. In this position, bishop comes on d5 with a check. After king goes on the side on h7, now we're going to have bishop d4, two bishops in the center attacking the pawn on a7. Black has a hard time to guard this pawn, and the moment black loses this pawn, white will have a very strong passer on the a file, and white will obviously promote the pawn to the queen. So this is a position he could get. This is very similar to the position which actually they had into the actual game, with a little bit different nuances there, and which was not so good for white. But Anish could go into this line and could have very good chances to fight for a win.
Indeed, yeah, here white has excellent chances. The bishops are very active, and white has 2 pawns for the exchange. However, in the game, Anish played queen to d4. So now black is forced to capture the rook on d5, which is what Dmitry did. Now queen takes d5, putting the king in a check. Going to h7, white first of all can go queen e4, to which the king is forced to go back, and white at least has a repetition. But white also has the move e6, which makes things very tricky, opening up the bishop, and now all sorts of checks come into the position. So Andreikin played king to f8, bring the king a bit more to safety, and it feels like white simply doesn't have enough compensation. If we have a quick look at the position, we see that white has a queen and 2 bishops, and black has a queen and 2 rooks. So black is up 2 exchanges. However, white does have 1 pawn for the exchange, because white has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pawns, and black has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pawns. I don't know if I miscounted there. Anyway, bishop d4.
That's okay. That's okay. The important thing is that even though that white is low on the material, white has very active bishops, and these bishops are controlling, and as the king is now in the between the rooks, these rooks are not connecting, and also it's not easy to find a target for the rooks. So in the game, bishop d4 was played, and we thought it's like, oh, it's just forced this queen trade, because after queen c6, which happened into the game, white had to take this queen. There's no other alternative there. And after rook takes c6, we had bishop e2 move. There is also a possibility to take a7 pawn and try to create a pass pawn. We were talking about this just earlier, that it's really good to have this kind of pass pawn, but this allows black's rook to be activated and to capture the side pawn. Rook h5, rook h1, and there will be some checks. c3 will create some sort of mating net. So this was some sort of counterplay that Andreikin would love to have. And for this reason, to avoid this kind of rook activation, white played bishop to e2 to guard h5 and to hope that this bishop will come on f3, and together the other bishop on d4, they will control a lot of squares.
Indeed, so bishop e2 was played by Anish, and Andreikin played pawn a6. And as you pointed out, it's really difficult for black because all of white's pawns are protected. So Anish played king to d2. Black brought his king up with king e7. Anish played king to c3. And here Andreikin played rook to b8. This is what you want to do with the rooks. You want to put them on open files and try to have them entering the position. So Anish played the move a4, and Andreikin played rook to b1. And so here Anish played bishop f3. And the game was really heating up here. But Keti, what happened at this exact moment?
Something unbelievable happened. We could not expect here. We would expect here white winning, we could expect black winning, but the game got frozen and we had no moves coming, and it's sad that they agreed on a draw after this move. So there was a draw offer, and both players decided that this is just too sharp to risk, not worthy to risk, as they have to play tomorrow another game. They both keep the similar chances to qualify to the finals, and this is very important for both players, as this is the first leg they're playing, and they clearly both want to be one of two players at the candidates tournament 2022. So quite makes sense here. Black has advantage, but due to this activity of the bishops and the king, it's not very easy to find the clear way how to win. And white has the same situation. It's just a very good looking position, but it's not winning. So draw was agreed in here, and all the actions gonna go tomorrow into the other game where they will reverse the colors, and Andreikin will go with white pieces and Anish Giri with black pieces, and we're gonna know the finalist either tomorrow or either in the playoffs. But we hope you enjoyed this crazy game, and this was obviously the best game of a day, and it was your rapid recap at the Grand Prix 2022.